Hey BCOM, I'm using YouTube to record this, so we will see how this goes. What I'm going to do for this video is a review where we'll talk through what you need to know for the Unit 2 test. So I'm going to pull up things kind of behind my screen and look at you still like this so that you know. Unit 2 tests, sometimes other students have said this is one of the harder tests. I would say it's because the Unit 3 test is easier. Completely acknowledge that. The Unit 2 test that you're about to take covers chapters 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. So you've got 5 pretty long chapters. The last unit test only has 4 chapters, and they're shorter chapters, they really are. So this test, we started off with the idea of strengths. So we talked about what strengths are, how they're different from traits and skills. That was also in chapter 1 way back, and we had an equation for strengths on that slides as well, so make sure you know that. Then we talked about the different domains of strengths and how they relate to teams, and we had the CAP model and the 4M model. So looking at the test, talking you through here, for example, when you have those different types of strengths where you think about strategic thinking, executing, influencing, motivating, those are on the slides. The question might be something like a leader who's really good at doing X, Y, and Z probably has strengths in which domain. So if you know that somebody's really good at convincing people to do a certain thing, that would be influencing. The test question won't be quite that easy, but that's one of them. We talked about how the fact that strengths are in all different domains, so that's on the slides, and that with the CAP model and the 4M model, it looks like there are a couple questions in each. Some of those were on the review quiz we did, thinking about what kind of questions do you ask yourself or not for the CAP model would be a way to study that. And then for the 4M model, we had that idea of realized, unrealized strengths, your weaknesses, and learned behaviors. So you'll want to know what each of those are off of it for the test. It's like there are multiple questions that are, in fact, quite a few questions that are after that. The next chapter that we went into was chapter 7, which is about, Northhouse calls it creating and communicating the vision, is what we call it too. But that chapter, we talked about the differences between a mission and a vision. And we had talked about the mission is the what are we doing, the vision is the why we were doing it. So vision is the much bigger picture, and the mission is often a little bit smaller. So we talked about how, like, when you have a really clear vision, that gives you meaning within an organization. We talked about some of the differences between missions and visions. And then within visions, there's one question on the test that's going to go through the different ways you can set up a vision. So there was a slide on this, and there were things like map and change, symbol, values. So have an idea what each of those are. So if you get a question, you could say which one it is. I'm going to talk really fast, so hopefully you're not trying to also 2x speed this. The next ones that the chapter talked about in that chapter had a couple of concepts like mental models and schemas, sense making. All of those are going to be on the test. So sense making is that idea like you're trying to figure out what's going on in a situation and what you're going to do. Mental models or schemas are going to be the way that we start to think about things. So I've got this schema or this way that I think people are going to behave is like set in my head. Kind of a little like stereotype, but not quite. Entrenched mental model means you think something is going to be something and nobody's going to change your mind on that. All right, the next step that's on the test is still sticking with this same chapter. I pretty much cut that 5th one on chapter 7. I probably should share my screen there, but it's that question about leadership communication skills needed to implement the vision. There's really not that so much on there as much as the idea that it's hard to do a vision. It takes time, but when you have challenging goals, all of those can be really effective. The next chapter is about establishing a constructive climate, and chapters, if you figure that 8, 9, and 10 all really link together and build off of chapter 7. So we started off with this definition of climate, and we talked about climate versus culture. One of the things that we reviewed in class, and this will definitely be on the test, is that concept of culture being something that takes a long time to change. It is really hard to change a culture, but you can kind of change the climate or kind of how things are feeling that day. But we talked about in class the idea that a constructive climate is really important. And we had a couple of slightly cliche words on this one chapter. We talked about synergy, cohesion. Those, make sure you've got those definitions down. Those will be in there. We also talked about norms in this chapter. And so in class, looking at the test here, we went over, and it is on there, different types of norms. So we had peripheral and relevant norms. Look, what are those? Look that back up. Make sure you got it down on your study guide so you know what the differences are between them. And then, of course, that you can shape it. Like, you can change norms within an organization, and you as the supervisor or you as a leader in the student org, any of that can sort of shape it through talking about it, through modeling what you want. We also talked about, and it kind of leads into the later chapter, the idea of, like, you can set people up to be a devil's advocate, and that was on one of the slides, and that's ways that you can prevent groupthink. Groupthink is a concept that is absolutely on the test, and there's a couple of questions about it. One of the questions is going to be about sort of what are the signs of groupthink, what are the dangers of it, and then kind of what leads into it. And that should be the big stuff from that section of the test. All right, the last two chapters. Chapter 9, which is embracing diversity and inclusion, is what Northhouse calls it. We talked about definitions of diversity, inclusion, and equity. Y'all did amazing if you were in class on the activity. I was so impressed by that. But the test does have those definitions, so just know that'll probably be on there, like either true, false, or multiple choice question. And they'll not just be like definition. It might also be like a little scenario where, say, somebody is frustrated with their organization. They see that X, Y, and Z is happening. This sounds like an example of, and then have one of the choices. Or it could be, I'm reading the test, that sounds like the manager is not demonstrating, and then the answer will be some, like, answer choices are like diversity, equity, inclusion, assimilation, like which one of those four describes the situation. So don't just have the definition. If you're not sure what it means, I'd look it up online. There's lots of websites that go into detail about that. All right, the chapter went into a couple other terms, including that quadrant. The quadrant is one of the things where sometimes people get stuck, and that is that quadrant where it talked about assimilation, inclusion, differentiation. Which one of those is the good one? It is inclusion. And then the fourth one's not on the test, so there's a hint. But you'll think about there, like, what do those mean? Can you identify an example of that situation? Those were really similar to the review questions, is another hint there. We also talked at the end of the chapter about, like, what can you do? So what can leaders do to advance diversity and inclusion is what it says on the study guide. And off of the slides, answers are pretty close. So things like, you can help others feel influential. You can embrace mindful communication. In class, I talked a lot about data analysis, but that's not in Northhouse. That's not on the test. The test really goes into the two that are on the slides: mindful communication, help people feel influential. And then the last things in the chapter were things that I'm hoping you've heard in other classes. So that would be things like, what does it mean for ethnocentrism, prejudice, and stereotyping? So there's two questions on the test where it's going to set up like a scenario, like, I don't know, your professor, I need to back that up because I already messed up the question. It's hard to write questions. Somebody walks into the room and pulls up their slides in your class. The person is wearing a hat and pajamas. So you think that this is definitely not the professor. Awkward pause. The person introduces themselves as Dr. So-and-so. What is happening that you see that person and assume it's not the professor, well, you're going to have a stereotype as part of it, but that stereotype has led you to an unconscious bias. So that kind of concept will definitely be on the test. And then on into the very last chapter, which is chapter 10, listening to outgroup members. First thing with outgroup, it can be good, it can be bad. Some people opt into this, some people are forced into it, and that's the real danger. One of the things that is not as much in your book, but I talked about in class, is that sometimes this can be positive. Outgroup members can help prevent groupthink. They can bring up uncomfortable points of view. In class, if you were there, I gave the example of I had some students who were older, returning to school, and they would just like bring in the most interesting point of views, sometimes arguing with the textbook, and it was useful. I had good information. We also talked about how outgroups can form from really silly reasons. The example I used in class, and I know some of y'all experienced this, is when you just end up in a group with people who are onboarded at the same time as you. Why that happens is so weird, right? But you might even think like, oh yeah, I'm still buddies with so-and-so because that. Or like you were on a pickleball team with somebody at work and that's like your group. It can be an arbitrary distinction. The danger is that, and the book talks about the negatives, so know the negative reasons, that those can lead to feelings of exclusion, people feeling left out. It can lead to even discrimination. Another thing that I don't even really know if I talked about as much in class is that outgroups can also form because of people's behavior. So people who are antisocial, who don't have really good communication skills, who I don't know, just refuse. I've worked with people like this, and it could just be they don't like to eat in group settings or they want a real lunch, but that can lead to becoming part of the outgroup. So sometimes those things can lead to it. The other thing that is in that chapter was a theory called social identity theories. There's a couple of theories in this chapter to know. A lot of these theories, there's a website called let me double check, Com Theory. I'm making sure the website's correctly. Communication Theories is called the website on communication studies. In fact, I never record on here. Let me see if I can share my screen without sharing the test. I don't know that I actually can. Okay, wait, I'm going to share. I learn all the time. Okay, there we go. This one, Communication Studies, is a really great one where some of the concepts in our class, so like social identity, I'm doing this and recording without looking beforehand. But social identity theory, you'll be able to pull up some of it on here if you want to look into that. All right, now I need to stop sharing my infinite screens of sharing there. All right, but Com Studies, it's a pretty solid website for some of them. All right, so back to the test, which I am not sharing on the screen. I'm winning at this review. Social identity theory is this idea that we start to form groups based upon this is my identity. So, oh my God, I'm going to give you a terrible example, but within the BCOM team, some of us get our nails done and some of us do not. And I love getting my nails done, but there is like a group of us in the faculty where it became almost a thing last semester that we're chit-chatting on it. And you can see how in faculty meetings, I mean, these are often usually really serious, but it's the kind of thing where like, it's not really going to make good synergy for the group. I have felt that way with social identity theory, and I've used this example in class when I go to meetings and people are talking about college football. I've never been at a college with a football team. I'm still not at a college. It's just like you with a football team. So then it can feel like I don't quite belong because there's this social identity aspect that people put onto themselves where you can start to feel left out. It's not always a good thing, but it can also work. So if I came in and hyped you up as the best BCOM section out of all the BCOM sections, you can see how you're like, oh, well, you kind of feel like a group, which is positive, except until, other people figure out that's what I've said to you. All right, so the chapter after that goes into the idea that we have these negative impacts, positive impacts on group synergy. So kind of understand, those are on the slides, so I'm not going to go back to them, but go back to the slides. The chapter also talked a little bit about how to talk to outgroup members. So there was a slide on that. There's 1, 2, 3 questions that are on that. The most missed things on this chapter are LMX, which is number 4 on the study guide. It is the last 2 questions on the test. On those 2 questions, one is going to be kind of like which of these is a false statement about LMX. That is straight off the slides. The other one is going to be a little scenario where then it's going to say, this is happening. This is an example of, I'm calling it LMX, but on the test, I write it out as leader-member exchange theory. Kind of what is it? And that will take you through all of the big content on the test. All right, so the other things, I'm already like 15 minutes. I'm just going through the study guide here. Let's go back to the review slides. If I were to recommend in order, based off of what people have told me before, you start with the review guide, get it all filled out. Do the Kahoot to see how you do. Use your review guide while you do the Kahoot. Then, if you are happy with the Kahoot grade and score, go next to all of those daily agendas. Some of them, or all of them, have the quizzes that we did live in class with the answers. Several of them have a second quiz that I didn't do in class because I over-prepared this semester. And some of them have just bonus questions. If you see a bonus question, so I'm thinking like in chapter 10, there's a whole list of like 7 other questions on that agenda that we didn't review in class. All the answers are there. That's because people missed those on a past test, so I added them. After you go through all those, on the unit folder, you will see, and make sure it's live before I stop this. If you are in the Unit 2 folder, you will see the Kahoot challenge, but then the Unit 2 practice quiz. Again, huge relationship between performing well, and when we've studied this, on that review quiz and doing well on the test. It's not everybody, but a lot of people, that is this connection. So I'd encourage you to do that. With that review quiz, those questions, like I said last time, are past test questions. So they are a great place for you to study. All right, trying to think if there's any other big things. I just went through the whole study guide. That's kind of the review I would have done in class, and then done the Kahoot with you, but you've got access to the Kahoot. The other thing that you could try if you wanted is going into something like ChatGPT and asking for it to quiz you on things. So if you're in ChatGPT, and let's say you have, pick a topic, out-group members. You can go on there and say, hey, I am taking a test about out-group members. Can you ask me a series of questions and then ask me follow-up questions to make sure I understand it? And that prompt usually works okay. The danger with that, which I don't think we really talked about this semester in this class, is that it seems to be trained on Northhouse's grad level book, not the undergrad one that you have. So sometimes it goes a little more in depth than what you need to know. But that is a pretty decent way to study and get instant help if you want to play around with it. The other thing that you could do if you want to go down this rabbit hole on YouTube on how to do it, all of my lecture videos are there. So if you can get, I know there's an app for this. I'm not going to promote apps though. Is you can get an app, convert that video over to a transcript, take that transcript, plug it into a generative AI platform like ChatGPT, and then say, ask me questions based off of this transcript. That is how I generated some of our review questions in class. The only thing is for class, I'll use the transcript and generate probably 20 questions, and then pick maybe even 3 or 5 or sometimes none of them because they end up being a little off topic or not quite right. But you're welcome to try that. If it goes well, definitely let me know. Happy to help share that with other students if so. All right, that was my quick and dirty rundown of our Unit 2 test and everything that is on it. Good luck. Again, I hate to say expectancy theory also was in this chapter 10, but yeah, expect this test to be challenging. I'm going to curve like I have curved on other tests. And again, the last test people usually say is a little bit easier. When you see your grade, remember I am going to curve, but because of when the test ends, it's going to take me a couple of days to get in there and get that curve applied. Just don't panic. Know that the group project is coming up, and that's hopefully can bump up your grades. I love to give A's on group projects, and I would be happy and so excited to work with your team to get you there. All right, good luck, and I will see y'all later.